are listening to Rootbound, a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside.
This episode of Rootbound is brought to you by the color-changing flower that is all sepals, the hydrangea. Welcome to the hydrangea zone.
Oh, hi everybody. Thank you for listening to this episode of Rootbound, which is the podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside. I'm the host of the podcast, and my name is Steve. Each week on Rootbound, I invite a guest who joins me on the show to share with us all about a plant that means something to them, and then I share with a guest about a plant that means something to me. And through this process, we can all learn more about plants and learn more about each other. It is the philosophy of this podcast that everybody has at least one, probably more, but at least one plant that is meaningful to them because plants are so integral to our life as humans on this planet. This is one of those special episodes, though, where we're only going to be talking about one plant. You know, every now and then there's a plant that is on my secret list of plants, and that means that the guest chose a plant that I also have some kind of connection to, and so that's one of those special episodes today. This is also a special episode because we're welcoming back a guest who was on the show before, way back in episode 11. But before we do that, I haven't done any vocabulary for a while, and there's a couple terms that came up in this episode that I always have to remind myself what they mean and which one is which. And so I'm going to tell you now, and hopefully that will help you learn, and it also helped me remember. So here, those two words are anther and stigma. Anther and stigma. They're both parts of a flower. They both have to do with the reproductive parts of plants. And the anther is on the stamen. And it's the male part of the plant, and the anther specifically is the pollen-producing part of a plant. And the stigma, which is on the pistil, that is the pollen-receiving part of the plant. So anther has the pollen, stigma receives the pollen, and some flowers have both on one flower, and some plants have male flowers and female flowers. And sometimes it's specifically a male plant and a female plant, but you need an anther to create the pollen, a stigma to receive the pollen, and that's how plant reproduction works. So those words, remember, anther and stigma, and I will never forget them now because I've explained them to you here on the podcast, so thank you for that. And before we meet our guest, because I am a dad, I've come up with a stupid dad joke to help me remember at least one of those words, and then I'll remember the other one by process of elimination. So let's hear that stupid dad joke now.
Why did the male plant do so well on the pop quiz? Because it had all the anthers.
Hi, Aja. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Rootbound.
Hey, Steve. Thank you for having me.
It's been a while.
I know. It's been probably over a year. A lot of things have changed in your life.
Indeed. Yes, as the audience knows, I just put down our little kid to sleep, and now it's time to talk about a fun plant. Aja, would you like to share what plant we're going to talk about today?
We're going to be talking about Maypop, which is the North American passion flower or passion fruit. So I'm really excited about this plant.
Awesome. And normally right now I would play a weird little dinging sound on a little device I have because this is going to be one of the special episodes where we only talk about one plant, but my little device's batteries died. So I'm going to insert it digitally. You're not going to hear this, Asha, but I'm going to insert it digitally now. And let's talk about the Maypop. It's a super cool fruit / plant. It's a plant, it's a fruit. And it's one of those ones that I feel like amazingly most people don't know about.
Yeah, and it's very unfortunate that people don't know about it because it's such a delicious fruit and such an important medicinal plant. You just spoke about putting your baby down to sleep, and passion flower and passion leaf, they're definitely good for sleep, insomnia. I'm not giving out medical advice. I'm just stating what they're used for.
Absolutely. That's one of the things when I first heard about this plant, first I was like, wait, what? There is a passion fruit that grows up where I live. I live in Northern Virginia, but apparently its range is even further north, and it's something that, I think most people just assume passion flower is like from the tropics. And so that first blew me away. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. There's this interesting angle with like, a sleep aid, which is a very, I also am not giving medical advice, but it's a very just common understood aspect of this plant. And I think there's even some scientific studies about it.
Yeah, and also the fruit. The fruit is used for anxiety and depression. So, like the whole plant, I don't know if the roots are used, so I can't say the whole plant, but the leaves, the flowers, and the fruit. And yeah, it grows way up here in Zone 5B in Indiana as well.
Wow. So interesting. I happen to have, we're not on a video link today, but I have two little Maypops here. I have my entire backyard is now essentially like a Maypop plant. I planted some 5 years ago when we moved in this house, and I just kind of let them go. And this year, definitely, especially since we just had this kid, I haven't been as able to be on top of my lawn care or my backyard care. So the whole like backyard is covered in Maypop leaves. It's pretty cool. It's a very amazingly hardy, and it's a plant that can really grow a lot in one season.
Yeah, boy, is it hardy. You have to keep it away from your neighbor's yard, I tell you that. So I planted some here we have some in Mississippi as well, but I planted a plant here, and it has definitely jumped over to our neighbor's yard, but they don't mind. I did tell them, hey, my plant is jumping over there, and they said, that's fine. So we'll see how long they'll say that's fine. But yeah, it grows like crazy. And I did not know that it can even grow in partial shade, because now it's jumped into partial shade and it's really thriving in that area.
Yeah, my whole backyard is very shady, and it's almost like a ground cover in the backyard this year, which is really incredible.
Wow.
One other thing about its growth habit that I found really stunning is that it's a vine. If people don't know, it's a vine. It has these cool kind of trident-shaped leaves, but it is a what's the word for it? It is perennial, but it's not a woody vine. The vines die back completely every year, and then each year it grows back even more faster. It's starting from zero, at least from the ground level. The roots are like what's going on. But I was just amazed at how it grows so fast and so far, and then all those vines die, and next year you have a whole new batch. It's just incredible.
Yeah, and I think you just reminded me, Steve, that I need to go gather my leaves so I can dry them for the winter. So I need to do that. We're getting our hard frost, and that is going to be a task that I need to do. And bring it in. Yeah, because the leaves die back and they will be growing like crazy again next year.
So let's talk about, I've been growing it now for 5 years, but my actual use is very limited. I have made tea a little bit. I haven't really I think used it enough to understand the effect. I've used the fruits a little bit, but let's start with the tea and drying your leaves. First of all, how do you dry the leaves? What is your preparation if you were to make a tea from it?
Well, Steve, I know my husband probably doesn't like this, but I'm very witchy. And so I hang stuff around the house. And so I prefer hanging them upside down in the kitchen. I think that is really, I like the aesthetics of it and all of that, but you can also put it in a dehydrator. But I prefer to just hang them upside down in the kitchen and let them dry, and I grab as neat.
Do you do individual leaves and bundle them, or whole vines, and how does it look?
I think if I did individual leaves, it would take me forever. So I do a whole, because like you said, it's so hardy. Yeah. So we get a lot of it. So I do I do the vines. I don't do the individual leaves. So I take, those little bread, vine things. What do you call them?
Those are little twist ties or whatever.
Yeah, the bread twist ties. And I use those to wrap them around if I don't have any twine. And I just hang them upside down on our shelves in our kitchen.
That's super cool. And then when you use them, you're just taking a dry leaf and you crumple it in the tea, or is that how that works?
Yep. And during the summertime or spring, when we have them fresh, I just take the leaves and I put them in a pot and I just make tea like that. But during the fall and winter, yeah, that's what I do. I just grab, a few or maybe one or two leaves, and I just throw them in a pot with some water, let it simmer, and there's my tea.
That's very, very interesting. And so, yeah, you let it just steep, or are you actively simmering it when you said simmer?
I let it simmer.
Simmer.
I let it simmer, and then I turn it off for a while. And I have a funny story, Steve. May I tell you a funny story?
Yeah, please. Please.
So I did this. I simmered it for a little while. I let it stay on the stove, and I left the house, right? And so I came back home, and my husband is laid out on the couch. And I'm like, what is going on? Are you okay? And he's like, honey, what was in that pot? And I'm like, man, like, have you not read any fairy tales? This is how every fairy tale ends horribly. But he had drunk some of the passion tea that was on the stove, and he was just laid out on the couch. So be careful with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. I think when I've done it, I've only steeped it, and that's one thing I've started to learn more. And maybe you have something to say about this, Aja. Like, the store-bought teas you get are always these steeping teas, but I feel like a lot of the wild teas require like a simmer. Yeah. I don't know if you have that experience.
I feel like that too. And I don't know if they put additives in these teas that you buy in the store. I don't know what's going on, but I do find that they, especially when you get them fresh, they do require a simmer. So just add a little bit of extra water, because you're going to lose that, it's going to evaporate. So yeah, I do prefer simmering.
Okay, so while we're talking about the beverage side, we're not in video here, but I'm going to make a little clinking sound effect here. This is a little bit of the stunt part of this episode of the podcast. So like over 2 years ago now, I experimented with making some Maypop country wine. I normally make mead because I'm a beekeeper, but I didn't have any honey at that particular moment, so this is with sugar. I made this drink. It fermented, and I put it in the fridge, and I forgot about it for like 2 years. And so I'm going to taste it now. It may be terrible. I'm not going to taste enough that it might poison me, but that's what I'm going to do on the show here, Aja, if you'll bear with me. I'm going to pop the little top of the swing top bottle. There we go. Let's pour a little bit. It's incredibly clear. There's a lot of sediment at the bottom. Let's see how this tastes. I know that you experiment with various fermented beverages sometimes. Have you ever done anything with Maypops?
Oh my goodness. I have not done the Maypop, but I've done the tropical passion fruit. So I've done natural soda. I know. I'm sorry, Chicagoland. I said soda. I did natural pop. I've made natural pops with tropical passion fruit. I know that has to be delicious, Steve. I'm kind of jealous sitting here listening to you sip on this wine.
I have to say, it's not quite vinegar. I think it's still wine, but it is quite tart. Yeah, it's tangy. I mean, a lot of these like wild fermented drinks are very like tangy, but yeah, I don't know. I think most people, if I serve this to most people, they may not like it, but I'm used to drinking weird stuff, and I'm surprisingly. Oh, and it definitely has alcohol in it for sure. That's I can tell.
Can you see yourself making a nice salad dressing with it, since it's almost vinegar, not
totally.
vinegary? Okay.
You know what? Now that I drink it more, it's definitely not vinegar. It is still wine. I'm amazed. Okay. It's still wine. I've accidentally made vinegar a few times before too. But yeah, that's good. Wow. Good job. Good job, Maypops.
So do you taste the tropical flavor in it? Tell us. We want to know more, Steve.
I'm so bad about explaining flavors, but let me try. It definitely is fresh and fruity. Definitely fruitier than most of when I make a mead, even with fruit, the honey is very dominant. And in this, it is more fruit forward. There's a little bit of a smokiness. You know, the Maypop leaves kind of have this like weird smell that's almost smells like burnt rubber sometimes. Is that?
Yes, I was gonna say leather. Yeah.
So it's got a little bit of that, but not too much.
Okay.
Yeah, it's wow. It's quite complex. I'm surprised. I would like see it in the back of the fridge every now and then, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna wait until I talk about the Maypop on the show, and it just kept not happening. And it kept getting
Okay.
longer and longer, and I kept getting very worried that it was going to be something terrible. But it's pretty good.
Oh, that's exciting. And for those who have not tasted it, in the Choctaw language, which is the indigenous language of Mississippi and Louisiana, one of the indigenous languages of Mississippi and Louisiana, Maypop is called Takon Holdba, which means like peach. So that kind of gives you some kind of indication on what the flavor is like.
Totally. I that makes so much sense. It's an interesting thing because it doesn't look like a peach at all. I mean, it is, if people don't know what a passion fruit is like, it is a passion fruit. You crack it open and it's got this kind of slimy bundle of seeds. But the taste is quite like a very crisp peach. Interesting.
Yeah. And
Go ahead, please.
I was going to say, yeah, it's so delicious. And when I lived in Venezuela, I would try to get the passion fruit juice every single day from the people who sold it on the streets. And it got to a point where my friends down there started calling me Mrs. Parchita, which means, I guess it means passion fruit juice down there. I don't know, but they were like, Mrs. Parchita.
Interesting. That's fun. I think I still have quite a few fruits out there. I'm actually holding a couple of the fruits right now too. I should try to go maybe make some fresh juice. Can you talk about your process of how you use the fruits? I haven't really done that much. This time I just kind of like ran them through a little food mill thing to get the pulp out and then put it with water and yeast and sugar. But how do you use the fruits?
Well, Steve, I gotta tell you, it's like I cannot name any fruits that I like better than passion fruit. So, since it is my favorite fruit, it hardly gets, I hardly get a chance to do anything but eat it. Just crack it open and eat it. And even the seeds, I'll eat the seeds as well. But if I'm making something, I suppose I would just, like when I made the fermented pop with the tropical passion fruit, I just scooped it out and I made it like what you just said with the sugar, and then I let it ferment. But it is my favorite fruit, so it's very hard to get to that point without just wanting to gobble all of them up at once.
You mentioned eating the seeds. I've been starting to do that. Mine are quite crunchy. Is that the same with yours?
Yes.
Okay. I feel like the tropical one maybe is not as crunchy, the seeds, or maybe they've been like bred for commercial use long enough that they maybe aren't quite as crunchy as seeds.
I don't know. I don't know. I've never even thought about that. Now, I will say, listen, I did say that it does grow here in Indiana, but we get the fruit down in Mississippi. I haven't gotten fruit here yet in Indiana.
Interesting.
So I just get the leaves and the flowers, but on our land in Mississippi, we do get fruit.
Let's talk about those flowers because they are just incredible.
Yes. They're like unworldly. I don't know what it is. There's just like some spaceship, Star Trek beauty. Like they're so pretty, and ours are purple and white. I don't know. I guess you have the same ones as you have Maypop.
Yeah.
But I've seen them in all not just the Maypop, but passion flowers, period. I've seen them in red. I've seen them in blue. They're just so gorgeous. Probably one of the most beautiful yet underrated flower that I can think of. Like, why aren't people decorating cakes and pies with these beautiful flowers?
And also, I mean, very, very like unique as well. They have a very special look. They don't. There's nothing. At least in this, maybe in the tropics, you have some more stuff like this. But in this continent, I feel like there's no flower that looks like it.
No.
Yeah. I can't really describe it very well. It does have petals. It then has these little like tendrils that go out in an array around, which are really amazing. And then it has this super ingenious, if you want to say it that way, method of delivering the pollen and receiving the pollen. If you've ever looked at that close, the anther and the stigma are orientated in this way where basically I think they're designed for bumblebees to pollinate them. And I see bumblebees on mine all the time. And the bumblebee will kind of like scoop around the flower, but then the pollen part, the anther, I think that's right, basically is just the right gap to rub on the bee's back. and then the stigma where the pollen is delivered is elevated. So when a bee comes in to fly and it lands, the pollen comes off the back and hits the stigma. It's really amazing. It's hard to describe. People, you should look at audience. You should look at a picture of it. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And just to have them and see all of the bumblebees just gather around it. I don't think I've observed it as much as you or as closely as you, Steve, but just to see the bumblebees, they just absolutely love it. They love the flower.
Yeah, look really close. And when you see the bumblebee, you'll see that it's kind of in this gap between, there's one part of the plant dangling down. It's kind of brushing on the top of the bee. And it's like, it looks like it's designed to like deposit pollen on the back of the bee. Very cool. Let's talk about names. I love talking about names of things. Passion flower, passion fruit is one of those weird ones because it's a plant that's native to the New World, quote unquote, but it has this very like Christian-y common name, which came from settler colonialism. Passion fruit. Passiflora, it comes from the Passion of the Christ, apparently, is what I've read.
Yeah, I think I prefer to call mine Taconhoba.
I can see that. That's a really good point. And I like Maypop as well because it is more colloquial. But yeah, this passion flower name, I don't really get it. Like if you go online, audience, you can read. I'll put some links in the show notes of how these Christian missionaries like put all the symbolism of Christianity onto this flower. It seems like they were forcing it. I don't know. I think they just saw a really pretty flower and wanted to like shoehorn it into their belief system, maybe. Anyway, I don't fully get it, but that's where the name Passion comes from because it is related, and or at least that's how the missionaries named it. And then the scientific name of the Maypop, the one we're talking about in this episode, is Passiflora incarnata, which means in the flesh, but I don't really know why.
You know what? Is it the Trinity or something like that? The way the leaves are formed on the plant?
Yeah, there is a Trinity in not the flowers have a 5, but they give there is some numerology with a 5, but then I think the anthers are 3. And then the little like spindly things kind of look like the crown, like the rays of the crown, or like, the halo that kind of goes off in rays. And there's a description on it online. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but they point out specific pieces and say this represents the cross and this represents the 3 and blah, 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 all that stuff.
Okay. Yeah, reaching. And I wonder if that also has something to do with the fact that this is a medicinal plant and maybe people were using it for rest and insomnia, and maybe they mixed it with other plants that helped them get, maybe they used them for ceremony. I don't know. Yeah. And maybe the Christian missionaries came in and said, hey, we need to rename this thing. I don't know.
That has happened a lot. I wouldn't be surprised. It's a common thing. Let's talk about the name Maypop. I have a few things that I read about why it's called Maypop, but what do you know? What is your understanding of why it is called Maypop?
Well, initially, I thought it was because the plant popped in May, but it does not pop in May here. It pops in May. It'll pop in maybe even maybe April or sometimes March in Mississippi, but this year, Steve, this thing here did not pop until I want to say the end of July. So, Yeah, you're going to have to tell me what you think about this Maypop because I really thought it meant pops in May.
Well, it does pop in May where I am. It pops up and it does pop up these little these shoots just pop right out of the ground. And that might make sense because colonists' first interaction with a plant was kind of around where I am in the Virginia area. Like the first accounts of it are with John Smith and that whole situation. So maybe this part of the seaboard, maybe not as far south and as far north, it pops in May. But that's weird. I mean, it doesn't really pop, and there's a lot of stuff that pops up that we don't call pop. So the other thing I've read is that it may pop when you step on it, which is very true. If you step on the fruit, they totally will pop. And if you're not, if you're walking through them and it's sometimes hard to see them. You'll step and hear pop, but that's also seems kind of weird. Like, why not just call them pops? Why Maypops? Like, is it really because they may pop and they may not? It seems like a stretch. So I think what is the real reason they're called Maypop is that the Algonquin word for them is apparently Marakok. And I think that word Marakok somehow got mutated into English to Maypop. That's my best guess. I've read a few places there, and that makes more sense than either of these Maypopping words.
Wait a minute, Steve. Now you listen, Steve. I go down rabbit holes, especially when it comes to language.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you said that, I thought about a place because I used to live in Venezuela, a place that was named after the fruit, and the name kind of sounded like what you just said, like
There's
Maracuya.
Maracuya.
Maybe that's it.
And so that's super fascinating because there seems to be some kind of etymological link connecting, quite a distance between the continents there. But yeah, right. Maracuya is passion fruit. Is that right, audience? If I'm going to Google that because I'm not 100% sure. Maracuya.
Yeah, get out of here, Steve. Wait a minute.
Yeah, maracuya is the in Brazil. That's what passion fruit is called, Passiflora edulis. And so that's really interesting that the Algonquin word in this part of the world is very similar. And so there must, that I'm always fascinated in like the cultural exchange, the pre-Columbian cultural exchange that, because of the history of this country, there's not a lot of information about, and I'm always so fascinated about it. And that seems like a very clear link that this plant had a similar etymological connection between Brazil and Virginia.
That's exciting because all right, it also makes me think of the Tuscarora War because from my understanding, Tuscarora indigenous people, some of them were sent to South America. So I'm wondering what is this connection? Oh my goodness, Steve! Now I'm going to be up all night long researching.
If you find something, let me know because that is an interesting rabbit hole to go down. Which the surface level of its names never even brought that up, and I don't even know why I didn't make that connection between Maracuya and Marakok before. But that's really interesting.
Wow.
Okay, I have one last thing in my notes, and then we can talk about any other things. The one thing that keeps popping up, and this is like what happens with the internet today. You read something, and then you read the same thing on a bunch of different sites, and everyone's quoting each other, and it's really hard to find where the original information came from. But I'm wondering, because of your, knack for going down rabbit holes and your intense plant knowledge, you might have some information about this, but maybe not. It's okay if you don't. Several places when they're talking about how it's used, they talk about the fruit, they talk about the leaves for tea, but many places, and they all seem to be quoting each other, mentioned that indigenous people in the Americas would sometimes cook the leaves with fat. And
I can see that.
And I want to try it, but I can't find anything else beyond just like that sentence, like cook with fat. But yeah, I don't know. That's all I know.
I can actually see that in various ways. And again, I'm not giving medical advice, but we're talking about a plant that is used for anxiety, that's used for stress, that's used for relaxation. So one thing that I can think of cooking with fat, which could be like a bear grease or some kind of lard. It can be used for probably muscle aches. I don't know. I'm not giving out medical advice and I haven't researched this, but that's the first thing that came to my head. And also it could be a way to administer the medicine with the fat instead of with tea. There are various ways to administer medicine. Depending on the condition of the person, maybe that was one of the ways that medicine was administered.
That's really interesting because when I read that sentence, my first thought was thinking about how you treat pokeweed. And when you cook it, you cook it and you like cook it with the bacon fat and maybe with some eggs and thinking of it as like using it in kind of a savory dish. But you're right. I think the way that it's written online is not very clear and fat has a different capability of extracting various compounds from things different from water or so maybe that is it, or maybe it's a combo of a meal and also a different way of getting the benefits of the leaf. Super interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I can definitely see it being used for inflammation, topically. So yeah, it could have probably been used for that.
Super fascinating. Well, Aja, do you have any other fun facts, dazzling details, personal stories about the Maypop?
No, I just want some right now. That's all.
I wish I could pass you one of these through the computer because I've got two right in front of me.
I wish you could too. And for the listening audience, you probably have tasted synthetic passion fruit, like through Hawaiian Punch. But please, please, please go out and taste the real thing. It is so good. The seeds might get on your nerves, but eat the seeds. Like, who cares? It is such a delicious fruit.
Yeah, 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 yeah. My heart,
Wop, do waddy waddy,
you.
Wop, do waddy waddy,
you.
Wop, do waddy waddy, wop,
passion flower of my dream.
Wop, do waddy waddy,
that you
Wop, do waddy
love
waddy,
me too.
Wop, do waddy waddy, wop.
I hear your name, my heart's aflame. I go insane, and you're to blame. Passion flower, can't you see?
Wop, do waddy waddy,
We're meant
Wop, do waddy
just
waddy,
for me.
passion flower of my heart.
What a wonderful conversation with Aja about the passion flower. And like Aja, I could not help myself with going down the rabbit hole about why the word Maypop, which is related to the Algonquin word maracok, is so similar to the word that's used in many South American countries, maracuya. That's a really interesting potential etymological link between two places that are so far apart. And so I went down the rabbit hole. I think I found an acceptable answer, and so I'm going to explain that now. It was a little bit of a circuitous path. So there's this guy whose name was de Candolle, a French guy, and he wrote a big book called The Origin of Cultivated Plants. He wrote all he could figure out about all the plants we cultivate for food. However, he didn't write about the passion flower. So a number of years later, these two other guys, Asa Gray, who is a well-known American botanist, and a guy named Hammond Trumbull, who is a well-known historian and linguist, they collaborated and wrote a review of de Condolle's Origin of Cultivated Plants, where they corrected some things they think he got wrong and filled in the blanks on the plants that he didn't talk about, including passion flower. And in their discussion of passion flower, they claim that the original word was mburakuya. I may not be pronouncing that right, but it is from a Tupi language, which was an indigenous people from Brazil. And apparently in that language, the Tupi language, it means fruit of the vine. So they're understanding that the original word is related to that language because it's very descriptive. However, there is a similar word that is in the Kalinago language, are also known as the Carib people of the Lesser Antilles, which is Marakoya, which is Marakoya. So there was Mburakuya from the Tupi, but also related was this word Marakoya from the Kalinago people, and they were well known to be seafaring people. They lived in this island chain. The Caribbean was named after them because they sailed all around there. So the assumption is that the name Maracuya got up to the Algonquin people of the eastern continent that is now called the United States through the Kalinago. So that's super fascinating. I think languages are so cool, and what we call things are so cool because they can reveal these interesting stories that may have been lost to history, but just the fact that those two words are related tells a story of how peoples interacted in a time before European colonialism, which is, I think, super, super interesting. And that's what plants and language can do, and I think that's super, super awesome. So I just wanted to share that with you. And with that, let's end the show. Thanks for listening. My guest on this episode of Rootbound was Aja Yassir. Aja is a holistic farmer in both Indiana and Mississippi. She uses intense biodiversity, regenerative soil practices, and ancient methods to grow soil and rebuild habitat. She has a new book coming out called Medicine Keepers, Herbs, Healing, and Pigtails. And you can learn more about Aja at her website, ajayasir.com. There will be a link in the show notes. If you like Rootbound and you want to help support the show, visit rootboundpodcast.com/support to find all the ways you can help support the show, including supporting on Patreon. Rootbound is hosted by passionate podcaster Steve Ellington. Music by Christian Kriegescota. Fake ads by David Lonnie. Rootbound is a podcast about plants for when you're stuck inside, but if you can go outside, try to avoid stepping on the Maypops.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Hydrangea Zone. Zone. It's something like that. I don't know.